Well, hello, I'm Laurel Kubin. I'm director of the Larimer County Extension Office, which is a part of Colorado State University Extension. And today our topic is going to be on creating and using a spending and savings plan. Now, some people might call that a budget, but if I ask you, are you going to spend money? What are you going to tell me? Yes, you're going to spend money. So why not create a plan to spend that money and then live by that plan? There's something about referring to it as a spending and savings plan that seems so much more positive than if we talk about a budget, which often has sort of a negative connotation to it. And so today we will be talking about how to create that spending and savings plan, and then some different options for actually managing the savings and spending plan. So we will review how to create it and how to use that spending and savings plan as part of this program. Why do you suppose we'd want to have a spending and savings plan? Why would you want to have a spending and savings plan? Okay, so to keep track of your money and where it's going. Any other reasons? Okay, so to plan so that you can balance what's coming in on the income side, what's going out on the outgo side or the expense side. Exactly, those are the reasons that we'd want to have a spending and a savings plan, so that we're actually working towards meeting the goals that we have for stretching our money as far as it can go, as well as trying to accomplish those things that we'd like to have or do in the future as well. So I'm going to go through essentially 5 steps for creating that spending and savings plan. And the first step is to track your current spending. Where is your money already going? A lot of times we work with people and they'll tell us, well, I get this money every month through my earnings or my benefits, whatever, and I get to the end of the month and it's all gone, but I don't know for sure exactly where it all went. I just know that it is gone. And so one way of having a better sense of where your money needs to go and how much needs to go towards each category in a spending and savings plan is to simply do some tracking. And you can do that by recording it in a journal if you like, or you could, if you don't have time to go back and or to do much tracking before you create that spending and savings plan, is to look back at perhaps checkbook registers or credit card receipts and statements, or maybe you have a box of receipts that are from bills that you've paid. Go back and try to recreate how much have you spent for food, for housing, for fuel for your vehicles, for clothing, for education, for all the different things that we all spend money on. But that tracking really is the very first step that will help us have a more realistic picture of what we need to be able to plan for. So that's the first step, tracking your current expenses. The second step is to determine what your monthly or your annual income is. And that can be more complicated than some people might think, because some people have the kind of a job where they're paid the same amount every month or so much per hour. It comes out to about the same amount every week, every month, every 2 weeks, how often they're paid. Other people may be in jobs where their income is more sporadic. What we advise, of course, is that you work with the amount of income that you are pretty certain you're going to have as income. So essentially, working with what the minimum amount of income you would have would be. So determining that monthly or annual inflow of income, whether that is through earnings or benefits or dividends you might receive, however you receive that income, knowing what amount you actually have to work with first. The third step then is to look at what our necessary monthly expenses are. And here I'm talking about the things that we really need to stay safe and healthy. And so what are the kinds of expenses you have that you would consider to be absolutely necessary for you to stay safe and healthy? Housing would be one of those items. We need shelter. We need some kind of a roof over our heads. Yes. What else?
Food.
Food, yes. We need nourishment to stay healthy, obviously. Anything else?
Utilities for housing.
Utilities, yes. During the winter, we need heat. Year-round, we need water. May need trash removal throughout the year, electricity. All of those utilities would be necessary expenses as well. Different families will have a list of needs that may vary from one family to another. But these that we've just mentioned are pretty standard needs. Other things that people may decide are a need would be transportation. Perhaps they aren't able to ride their bicycle to get to work. They work too far away. So being able to have expenses for bus or for their vehicles would perhaps be another type of need. And then if you have a vehicle, obviously insurance would be another needed item as well. I'd like to suggest that we also consider savings as one of those needed expenses, that we need to plan for savings and to put this as a high priority item. Here we call it pay yourself first. And that simply means don't wait till the end of the month to see how much money's left in your spending to put that amount of money into a savings account. Instead, determine ahead of time how much you can afford to put into savings and do it at the beginning of the month. That's what pay yourself first really means, is prioritizing putting that money aside into savings at the beginning of the month and living on the remainder. That's how people build an emergency fund. That's how people build wealth, frankly, is prioritizing putting that money aside early in the month and then living on the remainder of what they have available to them. The fourth step is to look at what their non-monthly expenses are. And there are certain kinds of expenses that we experience that come along just maybe once a year, maybe every 6 months, maybe quarterly. What would be some of the kinds of expenses that you or your family experience that are kind of sporadic? They happen just once in a while, but we need to plan for them. So car insurance, yes. Some people pay their car insurance monthly, which makes it a monthly expense. But some people just pay their car insurance quarterly, maybe semi-annually, or just once a year. And regardless of if you pay it every 3 months or every 6 months, you still have to have the money available when the bill comes. So we need to have been setting aside funds so that the money is there when the bill actually shows up. What's another kind of a sporadic and just occasional kind of an expense? Oh yes, birthdays and holidays. And for some families, those tend to land all in about the same few months. And here again, they're not happening every month, but we need to have the funds available if we're planning to spend for those holidays or birthday events. Are there any others you can think of? Taxes and school expenses, exactly, yes. April 15th, obviously a date that we all remember as far as taxes, but your property taxes as well. School expenses, perhaps the beginning of school is when you have major back-to-school expenses, but there may be some other expenses that come up through the remainder of the year, such as school fees that happen on a less than monthly basis that you have to be prepared for too. Another one that tends to catch people a little off guard if they're not planning for it is licenses for their vehicles. And depending on the newness of your vehicle, that tag can cost quite a bit. And so here again, we need to be setting aside some dollars every month so that when we do need to renew our license for the vehicle, we've got the money available to do it. So we have to plan for those kinds of things. And one of the things that I do is to get a calendar of the year and map out what are the kinds of expenses I'm going to have coming up each month that I know are things I need to plan in advance for. And obviously it's great if they're kind of spread out through the whole year. It makes it a little bit easier to handle those. And sometimes you might be able to change some of those payments so that they don't all come due in the same few months. That would be helpful too. So for example, your insurance payments, perhaps instead of having your quarterly payment come due in March, which is when you also have birthdays and maybe car tags to pay, you might be able to work with your insurance agent and have that moved to a different month so that you don't have so many big expenses coming due all at the same time. The fifth step in planning your spending plan and savings plan is to balance that income and what's going out. And that's the challenge for everyone. To stay financially stable, we want to try to have our expenses be no more than what we can actually afford based on the income that we have. And so that's why we focus on knowing what our income is first. And then, I haven't even mentioned it here, but there are some other expenses besides those that are absolutely necessary for our health and safety. And those would be those flexible expenses that we'll talk about as well. I do want to mention that because some people have irregular income, we do have a CSU Extension fact sheet that I'm showing here that you can access online that is on living on irregular income, because it is a challenge when you don't have the same amount to work with every month. And this fact sheet will give you some tips on how to manage a little bit more easily when that's the situation. With those expenses that we have fixed expenses and we have flexible expenses. Some of those fixed expenses are things that maybe we can't do a lot about them because we have signed our name on a contract for them. So think in terms of a home mortgage. A home mortgage, you've signed on the dotted line saying that you'll pay X amount per month for X number of years, and that's a commitment that you've made, a legal commitment that you've made. That makes it a very high priority, because if we don't make our house payments, then obviously there's a consequence to that, and we don't want to have a foreclosure on our hands, which is going to be negative for our credit report. Another kind of contract or fixed expense might be a car payment. Again, we've signed on the dotted line saying that we will pay X amount per month for so many years for that car. And if that doesn't happen, then they could repossess the car, and that could affect our ability to get to work. So those two expenses are examples of fixed expenses that we've made a major commitment to, and I would suggest are very high priority types of expenses for us. But earlier on, you mentioned some of the expenses that are needs that we need, like utilities and food. I would suggest that some of those are flexibly fixed. We need them, absolutely we do. But if you think about all the different places that we can get food at all ranges of prices, then go back and think about, how could I change the amount I spend on food? Instead of eating at high-end restaurants, perhaps eating at a less costly restaurant. Instead of buying the name brand products in the grocery stores, perhaps buying more of the store product. Using unit pricing labels that are at the grocery stores is a great way to help you make decisions about products to purchase that might be equivalent quality but less costly. So food is an example of what I would call flexibly fixed kind of expense. We need food, but we have decisions to make and choices to make as to how much we spend on food based on where and how we purchase it. The same thing goes with utilities. I'm a person who believes that every penny counts. And so turning out lights when you're not in a room, taking shorter showers, all those sort of things can help us to control the cost that we spend on utilities, which we need, but perhaps maybe we are able to cut the cost at least a little bit. Flexible spending expenses are those kinds of things that we have a lot of control over. And maybe we don't need some things as much as we would like to have those things. Those are the kinds of things that maybe make life just that much more enjoyable, and we want to be able to spend on things like recreation, entertainment. Yes, we need clothes, but do we need to buy clothes every month? Do we need to download apps and iTunes and all those sort of things? Well, yes, they make life more pleasant, but we don't necessarily need to do that on a regular basis. And so those are the kinds of expenses that are very flexible. And we would probably categorize those more in the wants category than in the needs category. And again, everyone is individually different and can put their own definitions behind what a need and a want is. But when we're trying to create a spending plan and a savings plan, these are important things for us to consider as to how much we spend on those things that are needed and fixed expenses, and how much we spend on those things that are flexible and maybe fall more into the want and I really would like to have it category. And again, we have to plan for those things that are periodic expenses. They happen less than monthly, but we have to plan for them by setting aside some dollars for those things so that when the bill comes, we've got the money to pay for them. So what do you do if what you're bringing in and how much you're spending don't match? Well, the first thing I would suggest that we do is to look for spending leaks. And I'm not just talking about dripping faucets here, although that's a spending leak too because it's costing you money. A spending leak would be things that you're spending money on a regular basis that maybe you just don't realize how much you're spending on those sort of things. And what's an example of a spending item that you spend money on a fairly frequent basis?
Getting coffee.
Getting coffee. Coffee at coffee shops, is that what you're referring to? Okay. Have you ever stopped to figure out how much you spend in a year's time on that coffee?
Yes.
You did recently. Would you be willing to share how much that added up to? Okay, so 3 coffees a week added up to about $14 a week, and it was $730 a year. Okay, well, you know, it's not good nor bad to spend money on coffee. If that's your choice and you can afford to do it, that's great. But if a person is looking for money to be able to set aside for an emergency fund, let's say, or for trying to pay down some of their credit card bills a little bit faster, or set aside for education expenses, that kind of thing, then knowing how much you spend on that item in a year's time gives you information that you can go back and say, is that really how I want to spend $730? Or could I maybe cut that to twice a week and still enjoy the coffees that I'm buying out, but it's leaving me with maybe a couple $100 that I could use for something else. So it's looking at, do I need this item? And is there an alternative that I can accept and still enjoy whatever that is? Other things that people often tell me that are in this kind of category that they feel they need to look at how much they are spending on that item would be frequent eating out, eating lunches out, for example, smoking, renting videos and various other kinds of entertainment some things like that. Some people say their purchases from vending machines. They need to stop and take a look at how much they're spending on that. Another would be how much they're spending at the convenience store when they stop to fill up the tank in their vehicle. And again, it's a personal choice as to how you spend your money, but by looking at how much you spend on those items in a year's time helps you look at the decision of, is that really how I want to spend that amount of money? Can I really afford to spend that amount of money on vending machine items? Or is there an alternative that I could accept where maybe I take some of those same kinds of things, having purchased them at the grocery store for less, and spending less with the vending machine? So that's what we mean by the checking for the spending leaks. It's truly just becoming more aware of what our spending is. If income and outgo don't match, then again go back to that list of wants, those very flexible kinds of expenses that you have, and say, okay, so what could I cut back on so that I have more money for the things that I really need? And again, that's a very personal decision, but when push comes to shove, that's what it comes down to. Another question to ask is, are there any of those fixed expenses that I could change? So if meeting the mortgage payment is difficult, you might consider refinancing. Would it be possible to cut the amount of your mortgage payment in that regard? Are there any of the creditors that you owe for some of those fixed expenses available to talk to, so you could maybe work out a different kind of a payment plan with them so that you're able to stretch your dollars a little bit further? And then again, look at your flexible expenses. Could you do more carpooling? Could you walk or ride your bike? Could you eat out a little bit less? Monitor your utility use. Curb your use of convenience foods, not just the convenience foods that you buy at convenience stores and fast food and so forth, but also think about how much convenience you're buying at the regular grocery store. Because every time you buy any kind of convenience, you're paying a little bit extra. And still you have to balance, how much time you have and energy you have with the money you have available too. So not all convenience is bad, I don't want you to think that. But we have to think about, are there some conveniences that we're purchasing that aren't allowing us to make the rest of our bills? So once you've created a spending and savings plan, we need to manage it. Doesn't do any good to have one if we don't manage it. And so what I'd like to look at are ways of recording those expenses as they occur, because you've created a plan. You know you're going to spend money. You're spending it just like you plan to, but it's a good idea to record those expenses as you go along. And then if you have credit card statements and bank statements that come into your house, be sure to open them up and reconcile those bank statements to make sure that you and the bank are on the same page with the amount that you think you have in the bank. And if you don't get paper copies of those statements, be sure to go online and double check to make sure that you and the bank are agreeing. It's really important to open those credit card statements as well, because opening them and looking at the statement allows you to see if there's any fraudulent activity that might be happening. Are you the one that's made all of those purchases, or is there something fishy going on? And you'd be able to at least get the first inkling of that by reviewing those account statements. Remember that the spending and savings plan is not chiseled into stone. And so if you discover that some of your expenses are continuously needing to be more than what you've planned for it, then go back and readjust your plan so that it fits your real needs for spending. And if some of those needed expenses are costing more, then look at those wanted expenses and adjust some of the money over to the needed expenses so that you can make those adjustments. And then use some kind of a management system that will work for you. There's no one way to manage a spending and savings plan. There are multiple ways, and several of them I would suggest here today include maybe using a ledger or a notebook. I mean, just simply writing things down. And here I have an example of what that might look like. And you can see that this family has figured out by tracking their expenses how much they need to spend on an average monthly basis by taking a look at what they spend in a year's time, dividing that by 12 so they know how much per month. And you can see that in November they plan to put $25 into their savings account. They plan for $1,100 for their housing expenses. Their food, their plan is to spend $325. Medical expenses, they plan $80. Child care, $225. Their car expenses, $160. Clothes, $45. And fun, $50. That's the plan. And as you can see, that's the plan for November. It's the same plan for December. It's the same plan for January, because they've taken the big picture of the whole year and know what they need to spend on those kinds of categories. And you can determine how broad or finite your categories need to be. There's no one way of doing that. Some people separate out food that you buy at the grocery store from food that you purchase for eating out. Either way, doesn't matter. It needs to work for you. And what you can see here, first of all, savings is right there at the beginning of the spending and savings plan. It's not waiting till the end of the month to see how much is left to put into savings. It's making a priority of it so that it's right up there at the first of the month. That's how you build that emergency fund that lets you sleep a little bit better every night and helps us through the lumps and bumps of life. So as you can see, as they used their money throughout the month, they just recorded and subtracted, so they always knew how much was left in that category to make sure that they were spending just like they planned to spend. And in some cases, there were a few dollars left over in those categories. And when that's the case, what they have done is to add that amount that was left over the month before to the amount that they plan to spend the next month. And it's important to remember that because, remember, we're taking the big picture here. We're looking at the big view. And in the case of clothes, for example, in this example, in November, they planned to spend $45, but they only spent $32. That means they had $13 still in that category. Come December, they added that $13 to the $45 they planned to spend that month. And that was important because we can maybe assume here that in December, this family needed to buy a new coat for their child. And they had the $58 they needed for the coat that cost $58. That's how that works. When there's some left over in a category, it's not free money to just go ahead and go spend. It's there because you're going to need it later on. It's like setting aside that money for the car insurance payment that's going to come up in a few months. Setting aside a certain amount to help you towards those sporadic expenses that are not every month. And if you discover that in one of those categories you are constantly going over in that category, then that's a time when you need to go back and adjust the plan. It's your plan and it's not written in stone, so you can go back and look for money from some of the categories that you might be able to shift over to that category where you're needing more. And where would you typically look for money in these categories to be able to shift to something that's obviously requiring more money? Okay, so in this example, you might go to the fun category. Doesn't mean you're cutting out the fun category necessarily, but because medical expenses are requiring more dollars here in this case, maybe diverting some of the fun dollars over to medical, at least for the time being, to help cover those expenses is how you adjust that spending plan. So this is an example of the paper pencil activity, whether it's a ledger, a notebook, or however you plan to use it. Other people like to use a computer spreadsheet, and that could be an Excel spreadsheet that you set up yourself in your own computer. It's essentially requiring the same thing as using that paper pencil activity. You still have to create your plan first, and then as you spend against it, keep subtracting so that you know what's left in that category. It's just that you're using the computer to track and know where you're at. There are other types of computer programs besides the spreadsheets that you can use. You could go online. One that's popular is Mintcom. A lot of people like that kind of a program. Quicken is some software, MS Money. There are any number of programs that a person could access either online or at an office supply store or other places. I don't recommend any one over another. You just need to perhaps play with some of them to see what's going to work for you. And with these, you're often able to connect them directly to your bank accounts and investment accounts so that you're really combining all of your information in one location. This is just a picture from the internet of the Mint.com, which is a way of managing your money and gives you charts and all that sort of thing. But again, it's only one, and it's just an option for you. Another option that many people are moving to is a smartphone app. If you've got a smartphone, there are any number of apps that you can download to help you manage your money. Again, it's a matter of putting in what your plan is and then recording against it. But it's always with you. And you can tie them together again with some of your accounts with banks and investments. Partners and spouses can often link together through one app so that there's no surprises about who's spending how much money and all that sort of thing, or where the money's going. But there are a lot of smartphone apps available for you to check out. Another management system that maybe you've not thought about is using your checkbook register. If you pay by check, or even if you don't pay by check, it's a system you can use, and essentially what you do is you take your checkbook register, and it's okay to write more lines in the checkbook register and make categories according to what your spending plan is. And then as you spend using your checks, then of course you want to write down what you've spent, the check number and so forth. But it's a way of having something small and simple with you that you can record and know what your plan is as well as where you stand with your plan. Notice in this example on the screen that over on the right-hand side, you keep the balance column there because you always need to know how much is in that bank account or that credit union account. So it's just another way of doing sort of a paper pencil activity, but having it easy and with you most of the time. Another type of system that some people find useful is to use a planning calendar. And with a planning calendar, what people will often do is take that calendar and write on it, when the bills are due, when they pay them, how much they paid, and it's their record of and also how much they're getting in income as well. It's a way of keeping a record of income and expenses. It's still valuable then to take a separate page and add up, okay, so how much of it is for groceries, how much of it is for fuel, how much of it is for clothing, and so forth. But some people like the calendar method as well. Another method is to use what's called the envelope method. And this is where you take some envelopes, and it really works best for those more flexible kinds of expenses where you're making frequent purchases, like food, for example, or your fun category, entertainment, whatever you want to call it, or perhaps a clothing envelope. You identify for yourself what kind of envelope you want to use, but it's a cash method of paying for some of these things is really what it is. And so people will take the amount that they have planned to spend on, say, clothes, and actually put cash in the envelope, and then as they are buying clothes, they buy it out of the clothing envelope. What would be an upside or a benefit to using this kind of a method? Would you always know how much was left? Yeah. You'd look in the envelope and say, okay, I've only got $5 left. I guess that means I can't buy the $8 pair of earrings. So you always know how much is in the envelope and how much it's very visual. You can see how much is there. What would be some downsides to using an envelope method? Yes, it could get lost or stolen. And we have had people in our classes who have said, I lost my food money. Somebody got into my envelope and stole money out of it. And so there are risks that come along with the envelope method. And I'd suggest that if you choose to use the envelope method, that maybe especially things like those more necessary kinds of expenses like food, don't carry the whole month's worth of cash with you all at one time. Maybe only put 1 week's worth of funding in it and carry that with you to the store, so that when you get to the 4th week of the month, you've still got some cash to use when you go shopping for your food. And you haven't exposed that to loss or theft to the extent that you would where if you carried all of the money with you. Again, you can put the allotment in the envelope. You might also want to use the outside of the envelope to write down how much you've spent every time you've spent some. And it is most appropriate, I think, for those flexible expenses. It seems a little bit silly to me to have an envelope for the rent when it's a one-time payment. Some people will use scanners and scan receipts into some kind of a computer program that helps them track where their money is going, that they can put it into the categories and know, where am I with what I plan to spend? Am I living by my plan? So you've got all these different options. And I think one reason a lot of people find difficulty with their, I'll call it budget right now, is because maybe they're not using a system that is working for them with actually managing it. But with your spending and savings plan, you can try any or all of these to see really what works best for you. I'd also suggest that when it comes to paying your bills, that you have a consistent place and a consistent time to pay the bills. Many bills are due on about the same time every month. And so if you can get into the habit of, on the 7th of the month, that's the day you sit down and make your payments, whether it's online or whether it's with check or whatever, that you just get into the habit of at the same time and place, and you'll feel much more in control and know that you're actually making those payments when they need to be made. Also, have a place to put your important papers. Your finances and your financial records are important to your life, and if you need to go back and resurrect how much you've paid, when you paid something, and perhaps some investment papers and all those sort of things, yes, you can take a shoe box or some kind of a box and just throw everything in it and then paw through it later on as you're looking for something. But if you can set up some kind of a filing system for yourself, that will just help you feel so much more organized about where your important papers are and being able to access them when you need to. And then I've mentioned here using a tickler system. And the tickler just simply is a reminder that, oh yes, I know that I'm going to have to pay my car tags in March. So am I setting aside money every month so that when I am going to get that bill reminding me that this is the month I need to pay my car tags, then I have the money. So ticklers might be writing things on the calendar to remind yourself about, okay, this is going to be due on a certain day or a certain month. That's what I mean by using the tickler system. So in summary, I'd just like to suggest to you that you create a realistic plan for your spending and your savings. And savings, again, being that very important part where you pay yourself first. Don't wait till the end of the month to see how much is left to put into savings. Even if it's only 5, 10, 20, 50, whatever you can afford, to put into savings first and then live off the rest. Because building that emergency fund, which ideally is 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, takes a while to build up that amount of money. Even if you could only build up $1,000, it could help you sleep better at night and be able to meet some of those little emergencies that come along in life, as they tend to happen. The other thing is to think about what constitutes an emergency that would require you to take money out of your emergency fund. A sale at the sporting goods store, I don't know. Is that really an emergency? You have to answer that for yourself. But there are other things that might be more dire kinds of emergencies that we want to be able to use that emergency fund for. Medical illnesses, losses of job, the furnace goes out in the middle of winter, all those sort of things that that emergency fund really should be intended to use for it. Then also use some kind of a system that works for you. All of us are different, and some of us like paper pencil, some of us like computers, some of us like web-based things. Doesn't matter, it just needs to work for you. And if you're using one that just doesn't seem to work for you, try a different one. Bottom line, using a spending and savings plan really gives us more control over our finances. And as you said, it helps you meet your goals for the future, to know that you're being more stable with your finances by not going over in your expenses. And if you're using credit cards, credit is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool that we can use. But try to not charge more in a month than you can pay off in full at the end of the month. It fits in with your spending and savings plan as well. But that will help keep you from getting more debt that is not going to move you forward, especially that consumer debt on credit cards. Don't have any today. Well, I'll tell you, if you have questions or if you would like to contact us at the Larimer County CSU Extension office, you're most welcome to do so through Extension as well as through our Make Change NoCo Financial Literacy Initiative here in Northern Colorado. We do offer quite a large number of classes, and some of those are at our libraries and at other locations. They're going on every month, and we would invite you to check out the Larimer County website or contact me directly, and I'll let you know how to find out what those classes are. We also have programs where we work with people that come through classes and occasionally can offer one-on-one sessions with people just to help review spending plans, to see if there are things that maybe could be helpful to manage your spending plan a little bit better. So give us a call contact us at the Larimer County CSU Extension office, and just know that we are a resource in financial education. Thank you.